Welcome to the Head of the Breach podcast. I'm your host, Case Camilleri, and we talk everything offensive security. Today, I'm speaking with Phillip Wylie, ex-IoT security evangelist at Phosphorus Cybersecurity and host of the Phillip Wylie Show. With over 27 years in cybersecurity and a decade of hands-on penetration testing, Phillip has gone from building red teams at Fortune 500 companies to educating the next generation through his best-selling book, The Pen Tester Blueprint, and founding multiple cybersecurity communities. Phillip, thanks for coming on the show. So, Phillip, we actually met at Cyphercon in person. Was the first time we met. What was your experience at Cyphercon like?
Yeah, I really liked it. I mean, met the founder at GurCon last year, and we were connected through social media, and he invited me to speak there. So it was a good experience. And one of the things that I like to share for anyone that hasn't been to very many security conferences in Midwest, Midwest has some of the best security conferences, GurCon, you know, Cyphercon, ThoughtCon, and some of those others. So it's pretty amazing the level of conferences you'll find in the Midwest.
Yeah, and really nice people like myself, right? Because I'm from the
Yes,
Midwest.
yeah.
Where are you from, Phil?
Yeah, I'm from the Dallas, Texas area. I live in a town called Carrollton. It's just north of Dallas.
Nice, nice. And what was your talk on at Cyphercon?
Yeah, it was optimal offensive security programs.
Give us the TLDR.
Yeah, kind of the inspiration for this talk was I used to be a red team lead at a small global products company. And it's interesting, I got hired to be the red team lead. And I really didn't put it all together until probably about a year or so ago that the CEO of the company didn't know the difference between pen testing and red teaming. I thought it was just the security organization. So when I joined the organization, the other security professionals and IT professionals didn't know the difference between red team operation, pen testing, vulnerability scanning, web app pen test, because one of the directors there actually wanted a red team operation performed against an SAP app. So I didn't really realize that. So while I was there, I created this one single page slide that showed the different types of assessments, including vulnerability management and vulnerability scanning, to kind of show the difference between all those to make it easier for someone to refer to that. And I turned it into a talk. And the first iteration was offensive security awareness. And one of the things I didn't have in it that I have in my more recent talk, optimal offensive security programs, was some of the gaps that happen sometimes in offensive security programs. So I kind of discuss the different types of assessments as well as going into some of the common gaps that we see and how to overcome those gaps.
What do you think are some of the largest and the most common gaps that you see?
I think probably one of the largest ones is frequency of testing, because a lot of companies do one once a year as a checkbox for compliance. And one of the reasons that I kind of believe that it needs to be more frequent, one of my consulting gigs, I tested a company and we had a 90-day, they had a 90-day retest built into their statement of work. So I did the first test, went back to start testing, doing some initial scans and vulnerability scans, and they had remediated the criticals, highs, and mediums. And the only thing left from the original test were the lows. But between that time, what had happened is a security researcher figured out an exploit for that low criticality vulnerability. If I hadn't come back and done a retest, or they hadn't did a rescan with a vulnerability scanner, then it would have been vulnerable for a year. And so just knowing the way that exploitable vulnerabilities are coming out more commonly and more quickly nowadays, that you really, your time between pen tests are a lot of risk there. What you do between those times that you pen test are very critical.
And this is why Phil and I get along so well, is because we were like, oh yeah, we both absolutely agree, right? At Sprocket, we do continuous penetration testing, and that's like, we see all the same things, all the gaps that are created. We like to call it the aha moment, right? Where it's like, oh, this is why we do this on a continuous. It's stories, like that, Phil. So, you've been in cybersecurity for 27 years now. Do I have that right?
Yeah, 21 years just cyber, and then 6 years before that as a system administrator, but doing Windows security.
Nice. MMC snap-ins and in terms like that.
Yeah,
You all remember?
yeah. I remember I was kind of an early adopter to server side security because I would use some of the security snap-ins to secure things. And sometimes when I would secure things, it would break functionality. So I was kind of early adopter, and that's really what got me interested in security to later move on into cybersecurity role.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And what do you think has changed the most about the offensive security aspects in those years?
It's very interesting because I think back, because my first pen test role was in 2012, so I started out on the blue team side in 2004. I think it's interesting how the tools have become more advanced, but it used to be easier to gain access to systems. It used to be easier to hack systems. It's interesting how technology has gotten so more complex, but the configuration was more difficult back then. So to configure things, it was more difficult. And I remember with like Windows Server back with NT4.0, it was insecure out of the box. You had to lock it down. Then when Windows 2000 Server came out, then it was locked down. You had to, loosen up security like you do on Linux or Unix or other common operating systems. So that was kind of interesting change. But the technology has gotten so much better. The tools are so much better, but then it's harder, to get a foothold in environments as far as the pen tester goes, as far as the defenders go. I think they've got probably in a better situation than what they were at that time.
Yeah, I remember, I feel like an old guy saying, I remember the times where you could actually just drop a binary on there and then it'll do X, Y, and Z for you, right? And now it's like, ooh, touch disk, like a binary. Like,
Yeah, it's just like MS 0867 with Windows that if you're in an environment that was vulnerable to that, which is XP and Windows 2000, then there's a high probability you were going to be able to exploit something.
yeah. Then PowerShell came around with macros, right? And
Yeah.
it was like shooting fish in a barrel, and then like we went back again. So we were kind of chatting a little bit too, what's old is new again, right? And specifically in some of the IoT aspects with devices. Tell me a little bit more about that because your day-to-day job is working in IoT and you are on the forefront and seeing a lot of this. So if you could just walk us through some of the things that are happening and what's happening with threat actors and how they're thinking about IoT devices.
Yeah, it's interesting. The company I work for, our product is an XIoT, extended IoT security product because we do more than secure IoT. We also do OT and medical devices and stuff like that. But one of the interesting things that kind of is related to IT security is how a lot of things that we would see as pen testers that we take advantage of, like default creds, are a big problem in IoT. A lot of times people get these IoT devices, they keep the default credentials, they're not practicing your normal security hygiene, like changing default creds, rotating out the passwords periodically. They're not doing stuff like that, doing your normal type of hygiene tasks. But the interesting thing is as mentioned, how it's getting more difficult to get a foothold from an IT perspective during pen test. Now threat actors are taking a playbook or something that they may have been doing for a while, but really have to leverage since these endpoints are so hard to exploit. They're doing things like exploiting security cameras and printers, just like the Akira ransomware, where they weren't able to get a foothold in the environment. So they were able to exploit this security camera, and then from the security camera, they were able to do a SMB share and spread the ransomware internally from that. And one of the things, even going back and listening to some other podcasts for other security firms, one of the things I heard several years ago, like on the Black Hills podcast, they were talking about how attacking the endpoint is more difficult. It's like you're having to come from outside from other devices and things to gain a foothold. So threat actors are doing the same thing. And people really don't take seriously or consider that IoT devices are a security risk. I mean, you think of a security camera, even you just think about what it's protecting or what it's seeing, that's intellectual property or private data that's visible, even privacy of your employees that is accessible through these cameras. And, people are using like tools like Shodan and stuff to find cameras attached to the internet to kind of find targets. And this could be anyone from script kiddies just playing around to serious threat actors.
So the explosion of IoT devices has just created this massive attack surface. And you're absolutely right, Phil, right? Like I look around this room, right? Like this camera I'm looking into, this TV over here, this thing, everything's connected to the internet, right? And most importantly, like what does that mean if I'm in an organization and I own the security aspect and I have all these IoT devices, where do I even start? What do I do? Do I do the basics like segmentation? Do like, how do I start to build defenses around this additional attack surface?
Yes, first thing I would do is make sure you've changed all your default credentials. Use strong passwords because the thing about those devices, you're not constantly gonna be logging into it. Plus, you got password managers and, get your passwords secure, upgrade firmware. And as you mentioned, like network segmentation, put these on different network segments. One of the things you can do too is if anyone needs to access it, it should be limited. So you can do like IP address filtering, set up an allow list so only people from certain segments can access that camera to administer it. Disable protocols that you don't need to use. I mean, like if there's a need, some cameras used to use FTP to transfer JPEGs to a to like a host. Make sure you're using SFTP. You're using some kind of secure connectivity instead of some of the lesser secure connectivity like clear text FTP or Telnet. Use things like SSH. Make sure you're using a secure connection because one of the things I used to see pen testing a lot of cases too is you're going to look at Wi-Fi networks, see some of the access points on the network, and some of the login. Sometimes they were using like clear text login. So a lot of the things you do basically on your traditional IT, this applies to your IoT or OT devices as well.
Yeah. You kind of remind me of a research project I did where they had the Foz cam, just a regular webcam, but is a pan tilt zoom. You connect this thing to, your network and it will do UPnP into poke holes and basically, have a setup DNS record, essentially, a dynamic DNS already set up out of the box. So you could find all these on the internet. And it's scary that you can actually pivot from these things, right? Like that had a wireless AP on it, right? So if you were able to get in with default credentials, like you said, by not changing it, you could then scan the networks and see what's around and figure out, like, literally pinpoint where this thing is on a map, yet alone see all video of people, right? And so it's kind of eye-opening to think, that was back then. And I'm just crazy to think what real threat actors are doing because the attack surface, like everyone now has more than just a camera at home. They have a camera, they have a fridge connected, the toaster is connected, everything's connected. That I wonder what research like that would look like today and what are the real threat actors doing with their real malware, essentially. Do you have any insights in that, Phil?
This is kind of interesting because I saw a presentation last year at B-Sides Albuquerque, and the person that did some research because their dad got some kind of box that you stream content to, and it was like super cheap, and she was just kind of worried that it wasn't secure. Started doing like Wireshark captures, started seeing some crazy activity. It was like phoning home to IP addresses in China. And people are so worried about the government's been so worried about TikTok, the metadata there. I'm more worried about some of these devices that we have out there. It could be even some of these home routers that people are using, like some of these TP-Link routers and stuff. And some of these home streaming devices, I'm more worried about that stuff because what is it actually doing? Because this is something that most people are going to figure is benign, but there's some cases where people, nation states are building back doors into this stuff, and you don't know what could be going on. I attend the Dallas Hackers Association meetings here in Dallas, Texas. They've had multiple people come in. They had Wi-Fi routers or different home internet routers that they sat there and run Wireshark against and did security research and found out that the IP addresses it was phoning home to like Chinese IP addresses. So just some of the risks of that kind of stuff is kind of worrisome. And I think from a home perspective, people really don't take that seriously. And even people that are, just have a home environment, you can still set up different IP addresses, different subnets, so you can't route to those. That way you can put kind of, VLAN those off within your home environment to make things more secure. But I think it's been underestimated for so long. So many people are worried about Wi-Fi in their neighborhood, and they're not really focusing so much on the connected devices in their homes.
Yeah, that's it's funny. You say that like this seems like a family member that I have purchases the thing that promises all the channels for dirt cheap, and it's just this black box, and I'm like, no. Like, no, like, someone's building that thing and who knows what has been backdoored, right? And it's seems tempting, but just don't if you can.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, thinking about some of the It's this, I remember back from 2015 or 2016, there was an IoT device that came out that the credentials were hard coded in the firmware. So I mean, you couldn't even change the credentials. So that's one of the things people need to really look into when you're buying these devices. Make sure the credentials can be changed. Spend a little time researching those and just don't buy whatever's cheap.
Yeah. Do you do any like reversing of some of the firmwares and stuff to dive deeper into these IoT systems?
That I haven't, but the organization I work for, they do that. And I got to go to hardware.io in Santa Clara a while back, and that was a pretty interesting conference. A lot of good hardware hackers there. Joe Grand was actually teaching some workshops there, so really top-notch training and content being provided there is pretty interesting because you go to your typical conferences, you see a lot of lobby con going on and people aren't in on the talks. But the interesting thing about that conference were either people were in the CTF doing the CTF, which is hands-on, that required the special equipment and stuff which they provided for you to use. Some teams actually brought their own hardware hacking hardware to the conference, but everyone was busy. They had breaks, coffee breaks and stuff, and people get out to talk. But most of the time, people were in those sessions, and it was people were pretty serious about it. But it's interesting to see some of the research being presented. Like I said, you had training from people like Joe Grand.
Yeah, that's crazy. He's so awesome. Listen, if you made it this far, I'm just going to ask you for one favor. Most of you listening right now haven't subscribed. Go ahead, feed that algorithm, and support us by clicking subscribe. Doing so allows me to bring you great content and allows us to bring more exceptional guests onto the podcast. Go ahead, hit subscribe. I appreciate it. What do you think, since you've been in this space for so long and you've built numerous communities and brought people together, many times in penetration testing, it's, we want to find the vulnerabilities of how to breach a company, but it's more than just discovering that. It's showing the impact of what could happen. What do you think is the difference between just finding the vulnerabilities and actually proving business impact to executives?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important parts because executives speak in risk. So you're able to tell them the impact is much more powerful to them than I got remote code execution. Let people know what the side effects are of remote code execution. And some other things I think they're best practices for pen test too is share some of the good things that you see, because one of the things that happens if you come in with all this bad news, they take it personally, and whenever they get a good accurate overview of their security posture, they feel a little bit better about it. So sharing things that they're doing good, even as for pen testers, if you're not testing physical security, make notes of good things you've seen. This is also things to go back and make recommendations on. You should have physical security as part of your assessment, so be able to make recommendations, share the things that they're doing good as well as the things that they need to improve upon, and relate that in that executive summary in the types of verbiage that the board, the CISO and CEO and the business units can understand.
If I'm a penetration tester or red team are listening to this, what are some like reporting do's and don'ts that you have?
Yeah, one of the things I would say, don't beat up on them, because like I said, be nice to them, because one of the things you want to, because you've experienced this too before, where you do the debrief or the report readout and they take it offensive and they don't trust what you're saying. So one of the things you got to do is let them know that you're a trusted partner, you're trying to help. And then also the way you do it, don't be arrogant about what you found, this or that. Provide adequate proof, because sometimes you've got this Unix administrator that's been doing this forever, that's done everything they thought they could do to make it secure. Maybe there's something they missed. There's some exploit out there, something you found. With them, you're going to provide plenty of proof. Make sure you got plenty of screenshots proving that you're able to exploit that system. Provide the steps. Ideally, you want to give them steps to where someone could pretty much duplicate the process if they wanted to, and provide plenty of evidence so that way you can show them. Otherwise, if you just got a screenshot of a shell with root or domain admin or system NT system authority, that doesn't, there's a lot of missing steps there. So make sure that you're giving them adequate steps and information on how you exploit that system.
And those are great tips, by the way, Phil. And you know, one of the takeaways I'm reading is, check your ego at the door. Don't let that bleed into the report, right? You are crafty, awesome hacker, but don't, rub salt in the wound at the same time. So definitely some good takeaways there.
And some advice to the new folks too, when we mentioned ego, is that yeah, you want to get if you can get domain admin, get it enterprise admin, root or whatever. But another thing too is remember that the crown jewels is the information, is the data. That's what you're looking for. So don't easily overlook things that are there that might be, very important. One of my best friends, one of his main techniques as a pen tester is always looking through shares because a lot of times he finds valuable data, including credentials. A lot of times, IT folks, system administrators, even sometimes execs will have credentials and passwords in a shared drive. One of these friends was working for a local government, and one of the executives had their banking information on their shared drive, the credentials and for their login information for their banking account.
Yeah, it goes to show you that you don't need DA in order to show tremendous
Yes.
business impact, right? And I think I learned that in my first year as a pen tester a long time ago, where I thought like DA is the thing. And then during the debrief, it was like, oh, lateral movement after that, was able to make my way over to, say, an executive's voicemail. And wow, like the whole room like was just like, really? Like, so that's when I learned like, oh, especially at a higher level, executive level, DA, what does that mean? Right? Like, who cares? And then it's like, oh, yeah, all that sensitive information that is there. Yeah, that's actually the impact to this business. So perspective as well as the flags, it's not just kill shots.
Yeah.
But you've built a lot of communities. You run a very successful podcast, the Phillip Wylie Show. What is what do you think is one of the most important lessons you've learned from building these cybersecurity communities?
Yeah, some of the best lessons I've gained, and one of the things I'd share, especially with the more senior people out there, is to be accepting and understanding of the younger generations. Because one of the things people don't take in consideration is that each generation is kind of different. They communicate differently. Be patient and helpful. One of the biggest tips that I got from someone, and it's just being patient. That's one of the keys. But I had someone that kept coming back to me, asking me questions, and this is stuff they could have easily Googled, but one of the things that I realized, because one day they came back to me and said, "Thank you for always answering my questions and not just tell me to Google it." One of the things, too, if you're helping people, is realize if they don't understand the topic well enough, they're not going to be able to successfully research and Google those terms. If they more they understand it, the better they can. So be patient with people. Come from a place of trying to help people, and you will grow your audience and whatever communities that you're trying to grow because they know you're authentic. You want to help people. People get on board with that.
Yeah. And building these and bringing people together, what's the best way to do it? Is it Discord? Is it creating a local event? Like, where have you had the most success?
I think it's a good combination because I used to run a DEF CON group. Prior to that, I called the organization the Pwn School Project. I was hosting 2 meetings a month, and it was in person, but we also had like a Slack channel and a Discord. So I think it's kind of good to have a virtual and an in-person opportunities because there's some people that are either for health issues can't meet in person, or there could be, restrictions on travel to get to places. That way you open it up, it can be more global instead of just local. But I think it's a good combination of both in person and online. And one of the things that I saw from Simply Cyber, they've got a really big cybersecurity community. I just started another podcast with them, and one of the things they do is they'll meet up with people at conferences. So like at DEF CON, they'll have like a happy hour, get together and just meet up with people in person. So one of the things I always tell people that are trying to build their brands, trying to network with people, is to take advantage of those in-person activities because you just build better bonds when you're able to meet with people in person. So I've known people for years on social media, and then once you got to meet in person, you're really able to understand them. Sometimes people may communicate in a way that you really don't understand. You just really don't know how much that relationship, that friendship means to them. So those are a lot better for building stronger bonds and connections with people. And it's just back to sales kind of one-on-one stuff. Your good salespeople are always working on those relationships. And that helps us as far as networking as professionals or just people trying to learn, being able to build those relationships. Because one of the things that's interesting, is you may be the senior at this moment, but several years down the road, someone you mentored may be the hiring manager or a company, someone helps you get that next opportunity.
Yeah, that's great advice. Never burn a bridge, and your next opportunity is probably who you know, right? Not necessarily, just a resume in an interview. It's connections that you've built and networks, and the more you build those connections in network, the more you have those opportunities. So that's good. Now, what has worked well at some of those meetups that you run, like far as topics, presenting? Is there a certain structure? Is it just a bunch of people meeting, talking about a topic, or do you find a presenter that has a presentation and there's a takeaway? Is it 15 minutes? Is it an hour? What does that look like?
Yeah, typically I would have speakers come in and speak for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. And then we'd have just social events. So if we didn't have anyone to speak that month, we would just get together and talk because, a lot of people would get to the meetings earlier so they could network and chat with other attendees and then stick around afterwards. So I think it's good to make sure have enough time that there's time to communicate during the meeting, time afterwards, give people plenty of time. But then sometimes just a social type of get together. And then sometimes we would get to like the holidays when the Sands holiday challenge would come out, hack challenge, where they would do the online CTF during the holidays in December. We would typically do the meetings that month. We would do it CTF based. So that way it's no particular topic and people could, network, communicate and work on a CTF and then kind of help others that are just trying to get started out.
That's so cool. I remember some of the best conversations and the best like tactics that I've learned as a penetration tester and a red teamer came from side conversations, either at a conference or at a meetup, where it's like, I did not know you could do that. Like, tell me more. And like those conversations are just pure informational gold.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about it because, when you're talking to people in person, you just really don't know sometimes some of the lessons that could be learned there because there's people that may not be a speaker at that conference. They're not comfortable speaking, but they got a wealth of knowledge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Phil, if you could leave us with one piece of actionable advice, if I'm a security professional who wants to stay ahead of the latest threats for the next decade, what would that piece of advice be?
Just keep up with technology. Don't fall behind. So, I mean, you may not, maybe one of these people that don't want to adopt AI, but learn how to use it to help yourself, kind of stay up to date with all the latest technologies. Because one of the things we saw with like pen testing is so many people start out, we're doing on-prem pen test. Some people didn't learn the cloud pen testing part and fall behind. So make sure to stay up with the latest technologies. You don't want to become a dinosaur. You see some of the people that used to use some of the old programming languages like Fortran and stuff, which later on end up paying off that they knew those languages, but you don't want to get replaced because you're not keeping up with the latest technologies.
Ah, that's great. Like it's great actionable advice. And you gotta have to learn AI. Like, I mean, that's probably the one piece of technology that I've taken away in my shorter time frame in InfoSec that is just moving, well, IT in general, along super fast, right? AI is going to be a disruptor, and you shouldn't say no, 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 I'm not going to learn that because just like you pointed out, you can't avoid some of this stuff. You're going to have to learn it, and it's going to make you better.
And with AI, you want to be able to leverage it to scale what you're doing. Because
Yeah.
one of my favorite quotes has been, "You won't be replaced by AI. You will be replaced by someone using AI."
Yeah, that's great. We'll leave it there. Phil, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for spending some time on Ahead of the Breach podcast.
It's been a pleasure, and thanks for inviting me.
If you've made it this far, do me a favor and check out what we do at Sprocket Security. If you're ever in need of a penetration test and you want that hybrid scalable approach, the always testing, always on, not this fake click a button, do a pen test 2 weeks and then do that 5 times a year. No, I mean always on, always testing, latest bleeding edge threat that comes out there, latest exploit, phishing, all the way to, defense evading, covert operations, whatever type of pen test you need. We'll do it as frequently as possible, and we'll also provide a platform for us to interact together. I've devoted the last 5 years of my life to building penetration testing and innovating upon it and changing it so you can actually do security testing, proactive security testing in a much better way. Give it a shot. Check us out, www.sprocketsecurity.com.